Hi, wonderful IGCSE Biology class. Today we're going to do a revision of chapter 1 in your book, and that is about classification of living organisms. And I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I also know this is a subject where I might ramble on, so luckily this is on YouTube, so you can just press fast forward if I'm rambling too much about spiders or sharks. So here we go. So, what does it mean to be alive? Are there any similarities between all living organisms? Cambridge lists 7 reasons, and as we'll get into, some of them are a little harder to pinpoint on all organisms than others. The first one is movement. That is an action by an organism causing a change of position of place. It's very easy in animals. Animals move around. But then there are animals who don't move a lot, or actually don't move at all, like sea sponges or corals. And we also have plants who they might change their position due to the sun, but some plants will actually move very little or not at all. Same goes for fungi. Respiration is breaking down energy in the cell to create energy, and that can be breaking down carbohydrates or fats or any other organic compound. But again, especially in some bacteria, this might not be the respiration we're used to, where we're burning sugar by using oxygen. Especially when we get into bacteria and archaea, there are some very different rules there, but they are outside your syllabus. Sensitivity is the ability to detect and respond to changes in the environment. So for example, that an organism can sense sunlight or heat, salinity, and thereby move or change its behavior. Growth is the ability to grow. Reproduction is the process to make more of the same kind of organism. That can be sexual or asexual. Excretion is removal of toxic materials and stuff we don't need anymore. And the last is nutrition, which is taking in materials for energy, growth, and development. And again, this can be very different. For example, plants use CO2 and sunlight, where animals use carbon from plants. And again, in bacteria, we will have totally different rules. So if we look at living cells under a microscope, and if you have a chance to do so, it's really fun. There are some similarities that goes for all living organisms. All living organisms have cytoplasm inside the cell. This is the liquid where all the magic happens. There will be some kind of cell membrane. We will have DNA. It might not be inside a core. That is only in eukaryotes. Prokaryotes play by different rules. There will be ribosomes where we can create things from the DNA, and we'll have enzymes that will catalyze the different chemical reactions within the cells. Other cells, plant cells, might then have additional stuff like chloroplasts, but these 5 things are the things that are similar for all living organisms. So, with the abundance of life on Earth, we need some kind of classification so we know what we're talking about. So I just don't say, oh, it's a yellow flower or it's a brownish thing with 4 legs, but we actually have real names for it. And this is called classification. And this can be done either by morphology, how something looks, or DNA, where we look at how closely things are related by looking at their DNA. And all this comes down to the grandmaster in biology, Carl von Linné, the beautiful Swede we see here on the picture, who helped design a system that we still use today. So the system we use today is called the binomial naming system, and for some reason we're still doing this on Latin. Latin is in many ways a dead language, but especially here in biology we use it a whole lot. And every species will have 2 names, a first name, which is its genus, and the second name, which is its species. So, for example, the animal we see here on the side, Canis lupus, it means the genus is Canis and the species, underspecies, is Lupus. Other Canis is like the dog, the fox, and so on. And we can see here that there are several genus in each family, there are several families in each order, there are several orders in each class, there are many different classes in each phylum, and there are many phylums in each kingdom. So we will say that this common wolf here is from the kingdom Animals. It's a chordate, it's a mammal, it's a carnivore, it's a canidae, it's a canis, and it is the Canis lupus, our wolf. So this is a system that's important to remember. First name, genus, last name, species. And just so you know, we are Homo sapiens sapiens. But there's actually more kingdoms than animals. We have the kingdom Animals, which is all the animals we know, see in Discovery Channel in the garden. Then we have the kingdom of Plants, which are from the biggest trees to the smallest flowers. We have the kingdom of Fungi, which are not plants because they don't do photosynthesis. Then we have the kingdom is called Protista, which is kind of like a group of stuff we don't really know where to put. And then we have the bacteria, which we today divide into eubacteria and archaea. Cambridge only talks about bacteria, but it's good for you to know that all these bacteria are actually in two groups today, archaea and eubacteria. And in this kingdom here, all the bacteria are what we call prokaryotes, which means they don't have a cell core, and everything else here is eukaryotes. And again, we are simplifying things here a lot, so I do know there are bacteria who almost look like fungi, and there are protista who almost look like bacteria. So these are broad lines, and there will be several errors when we draw broad lines like this. So a little bit more about the different kingdoms. Here I've chosen pictures of 3 of the kingdoms, animal, plant and fungi, and these are pictures I've taken myself just close to where I live. So there's a lot to see about these different kingdoms, especially these 3 if you go out and search for them in nature. Animals are the ones we're perhaps most used to looking at because of Discovery Channel and that we're animals ourselves. Animals are in general multicellular, which means they have more than one cell. The cells have a nucleus, but there is no cell wall and no chloroplast. There are some organisms like corals, which have a symbiotic algae inside them, and then the algae has a chloroplast, but animals don't have chloroplasts themselves. And animals feed on organic matter which were created by other organisms. So if you're a herbivore, you eat plants. If you're a carnivore, you eat other animals. And then if you're omnivore, you eat whatever you want to eat. So we can't make our own energy. Unlike plants. Plants, they do photosynthesis, which means they capture sunlight with their chloroplast and use that to capture the CO2 to make carbon. Plants are also in general multicellular, and the cell have a nucleus, they have a cell wall made of celluloses, and they often have chloroplasts in their cells. And they might, but not always, have stem, root and leaves. The third we see here are the fungi. The fungi were for a long time classified as plants, but they're really not, because they can't do photosynthesis. Instead, they feed on organic matter. That could be like dead tree, feces, old food, and so on. So this is why, for example, when you see mold on old bread, that are fungi that are feeding on it. In general, the fungi we see are multicellular, but there are many important fungi which are only single cell. They have a nuclei, they have cell walls which are not made of celluloses like the plants. they do not have chlorophyll, and they feed by breaking down organic matter from other living things. The two last groups that we have here in Cambridge are the Protocista. Protocista is like a mix of organisms which have a cell with nucleus. Some are like plant-like, while other are more animal-like. Some of them are single cell, but others are multicellular. So it's a big group, mixed group of organisms. And then we have the prokaryotes. The prokaryotes are the bacteria, and as we saw earlier, we now divide them into two types, where the archaea are the really primitive but also extreme bacteria who can survive in more extreme places. In general, they are often single cell. They don't have a nucleus. They have a cell wall which is not made of celluloses, and they don't have mitochondria. Again, there is way more to it than this, but this is stuff Cambridge want you to know for your finals. So, what about virus? I didn't show virus on the kingdom. And virus, which is what's keeping me from doing real life teaching and sitting here talking to a PowerPoint, is kind of in a borderline between being alive and not. Virus don't have its own living cells. It works by hijacking a living cell, injecting its DNA or RNA into it, and then telling that cell what to do. So virus is technically not alive because it needs to hijack a cell. And the picture you see here is the COVID-19 coronavirus, which then infects cells in our throat and lungs, and then those cells will start making new coronavirus, and that is what makes us sick. So a virus is somewhere between live and dead. So Cambridge would like you to know some, but not all of the vertebrates. The one we will be covering here are the bony fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds and mammals. But Cambridge left out the jawless fish and the cartilaginous fishes, which means we don't get to talk about wonderful things like the maxine, the hagfish, and we won't get to talk about sharks, which is, in my world, a crime. But we will be covering the phylum Vertebrata, and vertebrates are in general animals who have a backbone-like structure where we have nerves running down the back, and it also means that the skeleton, if there is a skeleton, because we don't really have that normal skeleton on the jawless fish, on the sharks, it's a different kind of skeleton, but the skeleton is on the inside, unlike many of the other animals we'll talk about later, where the skeleton is on the outside. So the first class here is fish, and fish in general live in water. And again, like when we try to make things short and simple, they often become short, simple and wrong, because there are a few fish like the mud skipper and the eel who can actually survive on land for some time. But in general, fish are aquatic. They live either in the lakes, the rivers or the ocean, and they have scaly skin. They have gills, which they use for respiration, where water flows over the gills and the hemoglobin then absorbs oxygen and releases CO2. And they have fins. And fish comes in many, many different sizes, from the tiny, tiny fish we might find, in a Danish lake or like many places, to like really, really giant tunas and stuff like that. So the fish are a huge group and evolutionary exciting group. The next class are the amphibians, and when we talk about amphibians, most people think about frogs and toads. And frogs and toads are, great example for amphibians. They are vertebrate with moist skin, without scales, and they lay their eggs in water where the tadpoles will swim around and stay in the water until they're big enough to hatch. Adults often live on land, but they like to stay close to water because they are depending on being close to water for breeding. The larvae have gills, but the adults have lungs, and this is the general thing. But some salamanders retain their gills as adults because they stay underwater. And in general, they have 4 legs, but there are some amphibians who are more snake-like, and they have lost their legs again. Our next class are reptiles. When we think about reptiles, many people think about snakes, but it also includes turtles, lizards, and crocodiles. And in general, reptiles are vertebrates. They have a scaly skin, which means they're better adapted to living far from water, although some of them are aquatic, like the sea turtles, or live close to water, like crocodiles. But reptiles can also live in very dry areas, like many lizards, and amphibians can't do that. They lay eggs with a rubbery shell, and this also include a lot of species we don't see anymore, like the dinosaurs, which unfortunately aren't here anymore, although they were awesome. So the reptiles is a huge group and also a very successful group. Our next groups are the birds. Birds are vertebrates which have feathers, and their forelimbs has become wings. It doesn't mean that all birds can fly. There are actually a lot of successful flightless birds, like penguins, who use them for swimming, or ostrich, or flightless pigeons, but their forelimbs has become wings, which they use for something. Eggs have a hard shell, and unlike the rest of the species we talked about so far, they are endothermic, which means they always have the same temperature on the inside. They have a beak, and they have a 4-chambered heart, which means they have a heart which looks pretty much like ours. And birds, are again very diverse. If you look from like a small hummingbird to a giant eagle, there's a huge difference in size and in how they live. And someone like the parakeet we see here are quite intelligent. Some, like the penguins, can be very social. So it's a very diverse group of very, very interesting and beautiful animals. And then last but not least, we got us, the mammals. Mammals are vertebrates also, but we have hair. Of course, some species don't have that much hair. Someone like the naked mole rat only have very little hair. Someone like the armadillo has some hairs that are like plate-like structure. But in general, we do have hair. We also have a placenta, and we have mammary glands so that the young offspring can get energy from the mother in form of milk. We are also endothermic, which means we have the same temperature on the inside always. We have a diaphragm, we have a 4-chamber heart, and we have different kind of teeth adapted to different kind of tasks. It doesn't mean that all mammals have the same teeth, but it means that we have differentiated teeth. So mammals that are us, that are like dogs, that are like horses. So it's a wide group, also includes rats, mice, and also flying animals like bats. So I've now been ranting on about the vertebrates for a while, but actually most species on Earth are invertebrates. And invertebrates here in the Cambridge syllabus, they focus on the arthropoda, but I just want to show you how many other different invertebrates there actually exist. And that goes from the sponges to the jellies, to the hydras, the corals, the sea anemones, the starfishes, all the different types of worms, earthworms, leeches, onto the snails, and even super interesting and intelligent animals like the squid and the octopus. So there is a lot of invertebrates that Cambridge don't cover in the syllabus, which is of course a shame, but there's plenty of time for you to go and learn about them if you want to, and I do encourage you to. So the phylum arthropods are animals with jointed legs but no backbone, and this is a very large and successful group here on the planet. And in general, they have several pair of legs and they have exoskeleton. And a very big and important group here are the insects. Just chose two examples here and close to my garden of a fly and of ants. Insects have 3 pair of jointed legs. They have 2 pair of wings, although one or both of them might be, reduced. They have trachea for air supply, and the body is divided into 3 parts: the head, the body, and the abdomen. And insects go all the way from big beetles to very, very small ones, and some are, solitary, and others like the ants, mosquitoes, and bees are social organisms which live in a very organized society. So insects are super important for our ecology, and they are a very successful and interesting group. Then we have the crustaceans. The crustaceans are the crabs or the lobsters that you might eat in a seafood restaurant, but it's also small but important organisms like shrimp and krill. They have more than 4 pair of jointed legs, but not as many legs as we later see in the millipedes or centipedes. They have gills, and they have a lot of different sizes, from the small, like microscopic krill, to the giant ghost crabs, which can be like 2 to 3 meters. So it's also a very diverse group, and some of them, live very short. Others, like some of the lobsters, can live for 40 or even 50 years. So it's a very important and successful group, especially in the marine environment. The arachnids are the spiders, but it's also animals as ticks, scorpions, pseudoscorpions, sun spiders, and harvestmen. And some scientists might also be inclined to introduce the marine horseshoe crabs into this group here. It's arthropods, which has 4 pair of jointed legs, and they breathe through what we call book lungs, which are gill-like structures they have in their body. Again, it's a very successful group. Many of them are amazing predators. The last group that Cambridge includes here are the Myriapods, which are the centipedes and millipedes. They have a body with many segments, and on each segment there is a pair of legs. And we often find these as detritivores or predators, and some of them, especially in the tropics, can become quite large, and some of them has bites that can be quite poisonous. And they're really, really cool. Cambridge don't go into as much detail with the plants as they do with the animals, but they do have a short section on ferns and flowering plants. The difference between ferns and flowering plants are that ferns, don't have flowers, and they carry the spores underneath the leaves. These leaves are called fronds. They usually have roots, stem, and leaves, so structurally they might look a lot like plants. Flowering plants can be divided into 2 groups, monocots and dicots. Monocots only have 1 cotyledon in their seeds, while dicots have 2. And flowering plants can reproduce sexually using their flowers, as we talk about in that chapter, and the seeds are produced inside the ovary. And this is just a very short introduction to a group which basically makes life possible. This is everything from, the small flowers to the mightiest trees. So it's a very, very important group.